Okay, we're now in Perek Daled of Kilayim Mishnah Chet. Daled Chet in Kilayim. Says the Mishnah, Hanotea shtei shurot. If you have two rows, im ein beinehem shmone amot lo yavi zera lasham. I planted two rows of vines. Now I'm just gonna bring you a picture, but this picture is a huge machloket. Let's just assume that my vineyard is here. So I have two rows. And now, according to the Bartunura, we're talking about two rows. I did this on purpose. Two rows of two. Let's look back at the Bartunura. Hanotea shtei shurot shel shtei gfanim. Two of two. Ve'ein behem achat yotzei zanav. So therefore, normally, remember we said that in order to have a vineyard, I had to have two. Let's just cut that out for a second. Okay? And achat yotzei zanav, and that's considered a vineyard. Okay? But here, the Bartunura says you're talking about 2 by 2. Okay? And for some reason, the Mishnah is going to deal about the space in between. Says the Mishnah. It's always an interesting question to what degree, how deep in the weeds do you want to get when we learn these Mishnayot. So let's learn according to the Bartunura, and then I'll go back and show you according to the Rambam who disagrees. Hanotea shtei shurot. If I have two rows, and I remember according to the Bartunura, 2 by 2. Shtei shurot shel shtei. Im ein beinehem shmona amot lo yavi zera lasham. If there isn't 8 amot between the two rows, then I can't plant in between. But if there is 8 amot in between, then I can plant in between. The Bartunura says the following: Im ein beinehem shmona amot lo yavi zera lasham. Why? Di mitztarfim liot keren. Aval rechokim shmona amot chutz mimakom hagfanim. Ein mitztarfim. They're not like a keren v'harei gefen yechidit. Umarchik shisha tvachim mishirazu. So let's look back at our chart. Since here, for example, in my imaginary measurements, they are more than 8 amot, there are more than 8 amot apart. So therefore, all I have to do, let's just give myself another. I'll give myself another box. So forget that and say it's not 4 amot. It's shisha tvachim. So all I have to do is shisha tvachim from this side. Okay, and then another shisha tvachim over here, and then in this whole area, since it doesn't have the law of a vineyard, I can plant over here. Why? Because these are just individual vines; they're not connected one to the other. The Mishnah continues. Okay, that's the law of the Bartunura. The Mishnah. Well, let's get rid of all of this and say the Mishnah. The Mishnah continues. I'm just going to get rid of these for our next case. Hayu shalosh. If there were 3 rows, im ein bein shura lechaverta 16 amah. If there isn't between each one and its friend 16 amot, lo yavi zera lasham. So if I have 3 rows, according to the Bartunura again, zera, then if there's 8 amot is not enough. Now it's considered to be an entire vineyard. So therefore, I have to have 16 amah. Remember what we learned? 16 amah. Why 16? 16 amah is the din of karachat hakerem. So if I have a vineyard and I have karachat hakerem, then I'm allowed to plant in there. Otherwise, it's not a karachat hakerem, and I can't plant there. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer Mishum Rabbi Chananya ben Chakinai. Rabbi Eliezer says, Afilu charva ha'emtzait ve'ein bein shura lechaverta 16 amah lo yavi zera lasham. Let's say I planted originally, I had 3. So now let's take our original case. I had 3 rows, okay? And now, I had 3 rows, and now in between each of I had those 3 rows, and now the middle row was charva, was destroyed. So now in between these 2, I had 16 amot. Now I have 16 amot. Says Rabbi Eliezer ben Chakinai, okay? Charva emtzait. So in this case, if I have 16 amot, that's fine. But let's say, for example, a different case. Okay, let's say I have rows. I have 3 rows. Let's take my vineyard in this case, and I have 3 rows. Okay, and now this is my original vineyard, and in between there isn't 8 amot. In between each there isn't 8 amot. Okay, but now for whatever reason, these died. So there are 8 amot in between. But what are there not? There are not 16 amot in between. So now it's interesting. If I originally planted them like this, if I originally planted in this case, that would be fine according to the Tanna Kama because I have 8 amot in between. But because when I originally planted, I did not have 8 amot, you can see over here, therefore it's now considered like I can't consider it like karachat hakerem. Rather, I can't consider it like it was originally planted. I have to consider it like karachat hakerem. And we see there aren't 16 amot between those two rows. And therefore, says Rabbi Yehuda, lo yavi zera lasham. Even though if I had originally planted, I would have the 8 amot and I would have the space to plant here. Since originally I did not plant in that way, since originally there wasn't the 8 amot in between, the 16 amot, the 8 amot in between, therefore, she'ilu mitchila natan, if I had originally planted it, harei ze mutar b'shmona amot. But now that there isn't shmona amot, I can't plant it in that way. Okay, I said I would give you the Rambam. The Rambam says something very interesting. Let's make this a little bit smaller so you can see it. The Rambam says the following. The Rambam says we're not talking about 2 by 2, but the Rambam says, okay, he says, marchik min ashura shisha tvachim. Hayu shtei shura. This is the Rambam. There were 2 rows. Harei elu kerem. This is a kerem. V'tzarich larchik arba amot mikol tzad. V'achar kach yizra. He's talking about 2 of 3 by 3. V'kam yeh b'kol shura. Shalosh kfanim yoter. And how much is in each row? 3 or more rows. This is the part that's relevant to us. When is this true? B'shaya kol gefen v'gefen me'arba amot ad shmona amot. When there's a distance between 4 and 8 amot between each keren. Let's go over here. Like here, this is exactly what we said. When there's between 4, there is more than 4, but less than 8. But avalim hayu bein shtei ashirot shmona amot. But if you had a gefen, let's get rid of this. If you have between 4 and more than 8 amot, but here remember the Rambam is not talking about a case where there's only 2 by 2. The Rambam is talking about a case, he says, where shalosh kfanim yoter, 3 or more. He says that's considered a gefen. Okay, and that's when he says, Harei elu muvdalot zu mizu ve'enam keren echad. So the Rambam seems to apply halachically the law of our Mishnah only in 3 by 3. It seems that according to the Rambam, if it was 2 by 2, none of these rules would apply, and they would always be treated like individual gefanim. I know it's a little bit confusing, and I want to stop here because I'm already going too long. If you have any comments or questions, you can feel free to contact me if this is a little bit too confusing at rspolter@gmail.com, and we'll dedicate this learning to the memory of my father, Harav Simcha ben Yitzchak Kalman. We'll stop here and have a great day.